Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Pollock, and this is Many Moving Parts. I'm a registered social worker and psychotherapist, and today I have a very special guest. I have Erin, who is here to talk to us about her experience with a partner that had narcissistic personality disorder and her own experiences of complex PTSD as a result. And Erin and I actually, we this is the first time we're ever speaking today. We met online through a mutual connection, and she found out that I was doing podcasts about mental health issues, and she contacted me through this mutual connection to say that she had a story that she would like to tell, and I love to hear people's stories and hear about people's journeys. So, Erin, thank you so much for reaching out, and I'm so glad you're here this morning. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am originally from SDNG area, sort of Monkland area. I'm in my 40s and I'm a full-time single mom. I work full-time in a dental office, and I also teach yoga part-time. And I think I'm just a normal 40-something-year-old, just trying to live life to its fullest.
Well, and being a single mom, I personally think that being a single parent, I think, makes us exceptional. I think it makes us anything but average. So, I'm glad that you are on the show today. So, Erin, can you tell us a little bit about what happened to you? What was your situation?
Sure. So I was 24 years old when I met my now ex-husband. He was quite a bit older than me. He was almost 40 when I met him. And I thought I hit the jackpot when I met this person. He was charming. He had an established career. Um, he was my boss in one of my first jobs working in pharmacy. And he just really won me over and swept me off my feet. And, he started taking me on trips and buying lovely, nice things for me, which, as a 24-year-old, I kind of thought that's what love and relationships were all about.
Mm.
Um, and as time progressed, um, he sort of started doing some odd things in the beginning where he would make me question my memory and things that I thought maybe I remembered he would say or do. He would tell me that that hadn't actually happened, and why was I remembering things that way? Um, and then very quickly progressed into being a very angry person. He would yell at me a lot. He definitely controlled all of our finances, um, progressed into some physical abuse, sexual abuse. Um, and in the end, I ended up checking myself into a mental health facility because I thought I had lost my mind,
Mm.
basically. He was in the medical profession and really convinced me that I had bipolar disorder.
Mm.
Um, would constantly ask me if I had early onset dementia. Um, Almost had me convinced to go for electroshock therapy because of my depression. Um, and I didn't know, of course, at the time what a narcissist was, what
Mm.
narcissistic personality disorder was. I didn't realize I was being abused because, of course, it wasn't like that all the time. It was
Mhm.
interspersed with big apologies, buying me flowers, buying me gifts, being extremely remorseful for his behavior. And now I know that's all part of the cycle of abuse, is just kind of stringing you along and then getting into the nasty things again.
Mhm.
So I ended up leaving him in 2016, basically because I was pretty sure I was going to end up severely injured or dead even.
Mhm. Yeah, and I can see the fear coming back into your face.
The nervous
Um,
system doesn't lie.
yeah, no, and I mean, we can shift topics if this is too sort of raw. Um, so so Erin, I mean, first of all, I'm so sorry that you went through that. I mean, I wish we lived in a world where, that stuff like that didn't happen. I'm glad that you were able to remove yourself from the situation, and I want to get to that a little later. Now, you and I had a brief chat right before we pressed record, and we were talking about how narcissistic personality disorder is very buzzwordy, and gaslighting was, I think, last year's word of the year, I think, or something like that, right? So it's very trendy to talk about, and we were talking about how when things become kind of buzzwordy or trendy, it might dilute them for people. So what is narcissistic personality disorder? Like, what are sort of the hallmarks of narcissistic personality disorder?
So the way I understand it is someone who, despite seeming extremely confident in their life, are extremely unsure of themselves. They latch on to somebody and they feed off of us. So they feed off of our strength. They feed off of, you know, things we accomplish in life, but also they knock us down at the same time to feel powerful and in charge. So I have a cat that's about to jump on me here.
Quite all right. This is a
um,
pet friendly zone.
um, and really, that's how they feel powerful in their own life, is by connecting with somebody who I consider myself a very empathetic person. They connect with people like us, and they wear us down to feel more powerful um, over a period of years. I was married for 10 years to this person,
Mm,
and it just progressively gets worse over time. And really anything they can do to make you question your own realities so that you are completely dependent on them in all forms,
mm,
financially, emotionally. I was basically separated from a lot of my friends and family, except when he would say it was okay to be in touch with them. um, Really, they're just people who want to be powerful, but
mm,
in some way they feel lacking. I do believe a lot of people who are narcissists have had their own, especially childhood trauma that they've gone through. I don't know what happened to my ex-husband to
mm.
make him this way. I don't believe that people are born this way. And I think it's one of the only ways that I can sort of make it okay in my own mind is that he probably has unresolved trauma that he hasn't dealt with from his childhood.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. Um, at what point, Erin, did you realize that something was wrong? Like, I mean, I know there's this pattern of abusive relationships that it often starts off very small and seemingly innocuous, and then
Mhm.
from what I gathered from what you were saying, it sort of progressively increased. At what point was there a line crossed where you're like, okay, something not okay is going on here? And how did you come
Yeah,
to that realization?
yeah, of course. Definitely, when the physical abuse started, that was something that's impossible to ignore. Um,
Hmm.
he would, he would tell me to do things like that I should just commit suicide. He would hand me a straight razor to do it.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
he would, it's hard to admit that your husband would rape you, but he would
Hmm.
do that. So those were big signs to me. It was very hard to pick out the emotional and mental abuse because I didn't trust my own brain when that was going on. Even years after I left him, I thought I was bipolar. I was a champion for bipolar disorder because I thought that's what was wrong with me. And
Hmm.
um, it was only after getting into therapy that I realized what had happened to me. Um, and realize the effect that emotional and mental abuse can have on you for, well, to this day, even, 8 years after leaving him,
Hmm.
I still have triggers. I still have days that are not the easiest, but I think the biggest thing is I have ways to deal with it now, whereas before I was completely stuck in my fight or flight response.
Hmm.
I was constantly on edge. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just knew, you know, all these many medications I was taking weren't working for me, and I didn't know why.
Hmm. So when you said you had triggers, I mean, now you're talking about having acquired CPTSD as a result of these experiences. So now, and I think I shared with you, I have PTSD as well. I was diagnosed in 2019. And I'm at a point now, and I feel from what you're saying that you're at a point now where we can both kind of operate in the world much more easily than we used to. So what were some of the things like how did these experiences impact you? Like how did your CPTSD kind of show up, for lack of a better term, in your life?
Um, I definitely had a lot of anger going on. Anger that I realized afterwards wasn't really anger. It was a lot of sadness.
Mm,
Um, I couldn't sleep. I gained so much weight. I mean, I was eating everything in sight because eating is one of the ways that I've always dealt with stress in my
mhm,
life. Um, I isolated myself from people. I didn't want to be around anybody because not only could I not trust other people, but I couldn't trust my own judgment to know who was good in my life and who wasn't. I think it almost completely erased my personality, to be perfectly honest. When I left, I didn't know what TV shows I liked. I didn't
mhm.
know, what my style of clothing was or how I wanted to decorate my apartment. Like I just had nothing left of myself except for a lot of anxiety and a lot of anger.
That sounds absolutely devastating. Um, eh, so how did you build yourself back together? Like it sounds like you were left with very little to sort of reconstruct your identity. And I don't know if you agree with that term, but that's how I felt. I had to rebuild after my PTSD. I felt like I was rebuilding my entire identity from the ground up. So do you have a similar experience?
Definitely. I mean, even to this day, I'm still working on that. And for the first, I would say, 4 years that I left my ex-husband, I didn't deal with anything. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to hear about it. I just wanted to live my little life and ignore everybody. In 2020, I went to an online, of course, because it was during COVID, weekend retreat with this organization called Rituals for Recovery. And they had a psychotherapist there giving a presentation on narcissistic abuse. And it was the biggest revelation ever to me. I read her book, and it could have been written about my own life. I immediately got in touch with this therapist. I started seeing her for therapy. I really got involved in doing a lot of yoga and meditation and journaling. And once you get through the hard part of therapy of, saying what happened to you, what I call the good part of it comes, where you grieve what you went through. You grieve for a future you thought you were going to have that didn't happen. And then you learn tools to be able to rebuild your own life. I use a lot of cold plunges. I use a lot of EFT tapping. I meditate. I do a lot of yoga. And I just find the more I talk about what happened to me, the easier it becomes, because there's so many people that this has happened to, and connecting with those people and giving each other support and knowing that, we're not crazy. We haven't lost our minds. We just had something very awful and traumatic happen to us that we've had to work through.
Well, and it just, like I said, it seems so devastating because, there's physical injury which can heal, and then there's emotional or, intellectual or spiritual abuse even, right? Which really undercuts at sort of the foundation of who we are. And that's the sense I'm getting, like you were mentioning that you thought you were insane, and this person had convinced you that you were crazy, that you had, early onset dementia. Like it's just sounds so sinister, and I'm sure it was. I want to address one thing that I hear so many people say, and I wish they would stop saying it, because the situation is not that easy. So you mentioned you were with this person for 10 years, and I hear people who have never been in abusive relationships just say to the other person, well, why don't you just leave? Right? Which is, I think, an extraordinarily ignorant thing to say. But could you address that topic? Because it seems to be the knee-jerk, right? Just up and leave, just go. It's like it's that simple, Can you address that, Erin?
I mean, full disclosure, I used to be one of those people prior to this happened to me. I used to wonder, how can these women stay in this situation where they're very obviously being abused and don't leave? And it's not that simple for a few reasons. Well, one, my ex-husband and I have a child together. I actually ended up leaving without him in the end, because it was the only way he would, quote unquote, let me go. But he controlled finances. I didn't have much of an education, so any money I was making was we owned some pharmacies together. That was how I made my living. So if I ever left him, I had no money of my own. I had no real way of getting a good job to be able to support myself. And you just become codependent on that person, even though you know and you see that it's toxic. Like, we're not blind. But somehow you hope that that person you met in the beginning is going to come back. And it took me a long time to realize that that person was never real. That person didn't exist. My ex-husband very likely never loved me, and I was always just someone to abuse to him. But to say to a woman, oh, why don't you just leave? It's never that easy. There's so many things that you lose and give up by leaving, you might end up, moving into a shelter, or and you don't want to bring your kids into that, even though what they're seeing is already toxic. And a whole other subject is how this has been impacted my son. um, but it just somehow seems safer, and I guess maybe not safer, but more familiar to
Hmm.
stay in the situation that you're already in, because you don't know what else is waiting for you out there.
Yeah, sort of the better the devil kind of situation. And in abusive relationships, a lot of them, there's this cycle of kind of, like you said, remorse and care and concern and gifts and apologies that seem very heartfelt. And I think a lot of people sort of hang on to that hope, like, oh, there's that little shred of that person that I once knew, or that I would like to see more of, and that kind of keeps you involved in the cycle. And for a lot of people, I think there's probably just outright fear, like, what will this person be capable of, if I leave?
Exactly, because I can tell you the abuse doesn't leave.
Mhm.
When you leave that person, it continues, especially if you have a tie to them, like a child. I mean,
Mhm.
I was still under his thumb when I left, because by that point, like, Children's Aid Society was involved, from people calling who have had heard us fighting. My ex-husband also had them convinced that I was bipolar and an unfit mother. It was even written into our contract with the Children's Aid Society that he could have full access to my medical doctors and medical records, even though we weren't together anymore, so he could make sure
Hmm.
I was still taking medications. If I did anything that he deemed not okay, he would withhold our son from me. Like, it continued
Hmm.
even after you leave.
Hmm. And it is that still the situation today, or have things improved?
Things are so much better now. My ex-husband during COVID moved out of Peterborough and didn't tell us about it. And it honestly was a godsend. He stopped seeing our son, um, which is why I have him full time now.
Hmm.
Um, and we are much better off for it. I'm the happiest, even though sometimes you can't tell. I'm the happiest that I've been probably ever in my life. And now that, especially, I've stopped chasing. I always thought the goal was to be who I was prior to meeting my ex-husband.
Hmm.
And I realized the goal is to become somebody better and somebody stronger than I was back
Hmm.
then. So that's made a huge difference for me in just accepting the person that I am now, and allowing myself to flourish, and hopefully to lend a voice to other women who are going through this. I think it's very powerful when we all get together and use a
Hmm.
collective voice to speak out against these things. Um, so definitely life has done a 360 since COVID hit for
Uh,
us.
that's fantastic. And I mean, and I think that's it, speaking about, just mental illness and mental health struggles, there is still such a stigma. I mean, it's better than our parents' generation, for sure,
Mhm.
but there's still this stigma and this shame, that I am glad to see is going away, but is still there to a large degree. But when we talk about these things, it destigmatizes, it normalizes it, and it gives people permission to talk about it. Lots of people, I don't know if you experience sort of the shame of, oh, I can't let anybody know that this happened to me. Um, you know, uh, but talking about it and realizing that other people have had similar situations is very powerful. And I like to think in some kind of karmic way, we're holding perpetrators accountable. I mean, we're not exactly naming names or anything like that, and not giving addresses or phone numbers, but I mean, we're speaking stories. We're speaking truth, and I think that there is power in that.
Definitely. And yes, there is still a lot of shame, even in my own journey. It was embarrassing to talk about what happened to me. And I also think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable to hear these stories.
Mm,
Even, friends and family who love you and want to support you, it's very hard for them to listen to these things that went on with you.
mhm,
Um, but I just think the more we talk about it and the more we bring this to the forefront, the better it is for everybody who might be in these situations, who might happen to listen to this or might happen to, read a book about it and realize what is going on with them, and realize that it's quite common, unfortunately. And also that there's so many people out there who want to support you and want to
mhm.
help you and want to, lend their experience to what you're going through.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Erin, I'm curious because you ended up in a hospital,
Mhm.
um, and I believe at that point you still felt that the problem was you,
Mhm.
right? And now at some point there was a turning point where you came to realize, like, you were able to put responsibility for this on your ex, right? Where that responsibility deserved to be. How did that shift happen? Was it like a big aha moment or sort of a gradual kind of, wait a second, I'm not entirely sure about this now?
I mean, over time, I realized that a lot of it was on him, but I think there was one final fight, where first he locked me out of our house. And then when he let me in, I've never seen a human being with this look of absolute disdain towards me in his eyes.
Hmm.
And I really thought at that moment, I thought that was it for me. I thought this is going to be the night where I don't recover from this, where he's going to do something that's really going to hurt me. And in that moment, I knew I had to figure out how I was going to leave with, no money, no car, no child, no anything.
Hmm.
But I knew without a doubt that I had to go. And
Okay.
I did. Within that week, I left.
Okay. What what gave you the courage to leave? I mean, I'll say gave you the courage. I don't know if you would use the same uh word. If there's
I
another
think it
word you
was
would use.
fear. If it was
Okay.
fear, it was fear that made me leave. And I know a lot of people don't understand how I could leave my child with this man to escape myself. And I knew in my heart that even though in different ways he was abusive towards our son with his words, I knew he would never lay a hand on him, because that would ruin his facade with other
Mm,
people where they thought he was this really great guy. So that's the only way I was able to leave there with sort of a clear conscience. And I knew it would only be a matter of time before he would grow sick of the responsibility of having our son 24/7,
mm,
because
mm,
he's just never really wanted to be a dad. I don't think it was another way to control me. He has kids from a previous marriage, one of whom he hasn't seen, well, since really the beginning of our marriage, which obviously should have been a big red flag to me, but somehow wasn't.
mm,
um, but yeah, I think just out of fear, I left.
mm. And I mean, like, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I'm often hear that courage is not the absence of fear. courage is being afraid but doing it anyways. And I still think if I may, I mean, I still feel it takes a lot of courage for anyone to leave a an abusive relationship. I mean, it grinds you down, and I understand. I can appreciate the fear, but I still think it's brave of anybody to leave. It takes tremendous courage to do that.
Thank you.
Um, so Erin, how did you start putting the pieces back together again? I mean, obviously leaving was a big step towards that, but then, as you said, you've got to reconstruct everything. No money, no place to live. How did you start putting the pieces back together again?
Well, after, I guess, maybe 3 or 4 months of me kind of being a vagabond, if you will, of just kind of sleeping wherever I could.
Hmm.
um, Once I started saying, like, I was going to somehow go and get a lawyer, I have very supportive parents who, have been there for me every step of the way, and I knew they would have helped me with that. Um, he did offer to pay for my first and last month's rent at a new place. I ended up getting a job working night shift at the casino as a table games dealer, which was a whole experience of itself.
No
And
doubt.
I started in therapy, which, I mean, out of any piece of the puzzle that I think anybody should do if they're trying to heal from something like this, get into therapy.
Mhm.
It saved my life being in therapy and talking things through, and being validated in what I had experienced. Um, I think surrounding myself in a healing community, going to women's circles, um, sharing my story with other people, really immersing myself in anything to do with the healing arts,
Mhm.
to sort of calm my nervous system, get me back, into the parasympathetic nervous system where I wasn't constantly ready to jump at people. Um,
Mhm.
and also having honest talks with my friends and family, and getting support from them, even though at times it was, uncomfortable and a lot for them to hear about, was
Mhm.
also a big thing. I'm very lucky, and I know others aren't so lucky to have a supportive family like I do. Um, and I think just spending a lot of time resting and sitting with my feelings rather than I am the queen of pushing things down inside of me. That used to be my go to, just like
Mhm.
ignore, ignore, ignore. Um, but really, it's just so important for us to acknowledge what's going on. Um, give ourselves some of the grace that we would show our friends and loved ones who might be going through something similar is really important. And really, the whole grieving process, I
Mhm.
think, is very important for people to go through. It helped me immensely to just allow myself to be sad about what had happened and know that, it really was nothing to do with me per se. It's was all his issues that unfortunately,
Mhm.
you know, got taken out on me.
Yeah, and it's you mentioned earlier, and I thought is particularly poignant. You said you were angry at first, and then when you sort of looked underneath that, you realized that it was a lot of sadness and grief. And this is something that I experience in my own life, and I hear with a lot of people. Anger seems to feel. I don't know if you agree, but anger to me feels more dynamic. It feels more productive. So something happens to me, my knee-jerk reaction might be anger because I feel like I'm accomplishing something by being angry. But being sad, I don't. It's like just I'm sitting there being sad, right? But sometimes that's the that's the emotion that needs to be felt, but anger is like this layer of insulation.
Well, and I think anger in a way is an easier emotion to deal with than
Mm.
sadness. I mean, sadness just so heavy, and
Hmm.
just feels so hopeless. So I think it's sort of like a default sometimes in trauma survivors that the anger takes over because, it's easy, you can get it out, you feel
Yeah.
better afterwards. But it really doesn't solve the problem if that isn't actually the emotion that's really happening to you. It's just one that's sort of
Hmm.
masking everything.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think in your situation and people with similar situations, I think anger is a legitimate reaction to have. It's not to say that it's not, but it's I think, like you said, drilling down a bit to the grief is kind of where a lot of the work needs to happen.
Mhm.
Um, Now, Erin, you also mentioned the parasympathetic nervous system, and you mentioned, being in fight or flight all the time. So, for people who might not be familiar with PTSD, CPTSD, its symptoms, and its chemistry, can you describe sort of what your symptoms were, and how you were responding to the triggers you mentioned earlier?
Of course. So I had constant anxiety. I always felt like something bad was about to happen. I didn't know what that would
Mm.
be, but I knew something bad was coming, even though a lot of the time it wasn't. It was just sort of ingrained in me at that point that, like, some good could happen, but it was always followed up by something bad. So I was always waiting
Mhm.
for the other shoe to drop. Um, I had the constant mind racing all the time, just intrusive thoughts about, myself and others. Myself would have a lot to do with, self-harm or, why am I here? Like, why did this happen to me? Um, a lot of just not dealing with things, kind of, shoving myself into a little hole and hoping that everything would just go away, which of course as a result ended in more anxiety. So that wasn't very helpful in the end. um, but I think that from my own experience, my overwhelming feeling was just, I constantly felt like I was going to jump out of my seat for something. Like, I never
Mhm.
relaxed ever. I didn't know what that was anymore.
Yeah, never being at rest. So, I mean, for anybody listening who might not be familiar with CPTSD, it puts you always in a state of fight or flight, right? So that sort of animal reaction you get into, am I going to defend myself or am I going to run away from this situation? And you often find, I find at least, when I get triggered, my muscles are tensed. As you mentioned, I'm ready to jump out of my seat. At any moment, I feel threats where there are no threats. I could feel a threat standing in the middle of a hay field. I'd be like, no, there's something's going to attack me here in the middle of this field. Um, Excuse me. Yeah, and it's a very disconcerting, it's an exhausting way to live. Like just always being in that kind of primitive area of your brain. It can be really debilitating.
No, exactly. And, triggers are a funny thing because, you obviously don't always know what your triggers are. I can
Hmm.
remember I was in a lineup to get food at this outdoor barbecue place near us. And there was, I should mention my ex-husband is British. So there was this British guy in front of us with his child. And the kid was kind of bouncing around and not acting the best, and the dad had said a couple of times to stop, and then all of a sudden the dad turned and said, I told you the first time to stop this, in this very thick British accent. And I just
Mm-hmm.
felt my stomach drop out
Right.
of my body. And,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
never thought I would be triggered standing in line to get food somewhere, but I couldn't move. The person
Yeah.
I was with immediately noticed something was wrong with me and started, knew my past and started talking to me to kind of bring me back to reality, if you will, because it just brought me to this place that I didn't even know existed. So it's very hard, even just being in everyday life and having things like that happen, that all of a sudden you're triggered, and
Mm-hmm.
you just don't expect those things to happen all the time.
No, no, and you're right. It can be so subtle. Like, who would have ever expected, standing in line at a barbecue that that was going to happen? But like you said, certain accents, certain sounds, certain smells, just a certain type of weather
And
can
like
can often be
facial
a trigger for a lot
expressions
of
on
people.
people, even, I'm just like, oh God, that face
Yeah,
is
that face
not
is
good.
reminiscent of a face I've seen before.
Yeah.
So, um, so over the course of your journey, Erin, over the course of your recovery, it seems that you have managed to acquire some helpful coping skills. So, what are some of the coping skills that you learned? What are some of your go-tos to sort of manage triggers and manage intrusive thoughts and emotions that come along with PTSD?
Yeah, of course. So I find journaling is hugely helpful for me, writing down what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, and then realizing how those things sort of have connected to something in my past has helped me a lot.
Mhm.
Um, as I said, I meditate a lot. I tend to surround myself with people who are also on a healing journey. I just find community support for my own healing journey has been extremely helpful. I'm so
Mhm.
lucky to be part of a wonderful yoga studio who, more than focus on physical aspects of yoga, really focuses on the mental aspects of yoga and how it can be helpful. I attend a lot of workshops, women's circles. On more extreme days, I tend to ruminate a lot over things. So the same thing goes over and over and over in my mind.
Mhm.
I found either an ice bath in my tub, or even just dunking my head into ice water to just, sort of shock the system and get you out of that, constant thinking, has been very helpful for me as well.
Mhm.
And, even simple things, walks in nature, going out by the water and spending the day. The water to me is very calming and
Mhm.
centering. Um, and then just talking about it. I think I'm past the point in my life where I don't want to talk about it. I do want to talk about what happened. I want to, raise awareness, and that's been very therapeutic for me. um,
Mhm.
I, of course, wrote my story in a book, which was
Yes.
extremely therapeutic for me as well, to get it all out on paper. um, and know that people could read my story and hopefully connect to it and realize they don't have to stay in this situation.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave a link to that book in the description for this video. So tell us about the book. Tell us about the process of writing, how that came to be.
Yeah, so it was through this organization, Rituals for Recovery. The founder, Amanda Willett, she is also a survivor of abuse, childhood abuse as well. And she is a beacon of hope in the wellness community. She got a bunch of women together, whether it be, sexual abuse, domestic abuse, um, generational abuse, and got us all together to tell our stories. Um, but make it more of a beacon of hope for people to realize that there's help out there, there's healing available for everybody. It's called Speak Out and Help Her Recover. And I was one of those people who thought I was never going to get better. I thought that's just the way that I was now, and I was just going to have to deal with that. And everybody else in my life was also going to have to deal with that. And I just know that if I can recover or be on the road to recovery from what happened to me, I know that help is out there for everybody. I love seeing the wellness community expand. I think it has really been brought to the forefront in the last couple of years, especially with, people having lots of problems from dealing with COVID and how that brought up a lot of mental health issues in people. So I think just knowing that there's so many individuals and communities and just even people in your own life out there who want to help and support your recovery is a huge motivator for a lot of people.
Well, and absolutely, and just knowing that you're not alone. I mean, I also spent a couple of weeks on a psych ward with suicidal depression because of my PTSD, and I thought I was insane, and I thought there was no getting better. And I really liked what you said earlier. There was an aspect of grief for me because I remember telling my wife a number of times, I just want the old me back. I felt that there had been a fundamental shift in who I was. And like you said, it wasn't a question of going back to the Erin from before, right? It was a question of rebuilding and becoming a new Erin. I mean, I don't know if you still feel that what is at your core is still there and never left, but certainly it took a long time to build for me to build a nest around that core, to feel a little more secure in that core.
No, definitely. Prior to, it's like prior husband and then after husband is how I kind of separate my life. And prior me was, I was a bit of a wild child. I was very carefree. I just kind of went with things at the drop of a hat, and I was sort of all over the place, as an early 20-something-year-old woman is, That part I have lost because I have to make sure of things now. I have to know what is going on. I have to know, who's going to be there. I have to know the details of everything. Like, I'm not just a fly by the seat of your pants anymore. But I think the core of who I am, the empathetic, sort of realistic, supportive person who I always was is still there. And that's never going to leave me because, that is who I am. I love to support my friends and I love to support my community. And that's never going to change about me.
Well, and certainly the support that you are offering to other people who are involved with narcissists or who have CPTSD. I mean, just sharing your story, I'm sure, is therapeutic as well.
Definitely.
So Erin, I just wanted to focus on a couple of things that you mentioned. So, I mean, meditation and journaling, and I hear people suggest that a lot. And in my private practice, I often suggest it, but people are like, but then what kind of meditation? And well, what do I do with those journals? Do I just write things down and then burn it or stick it on a shelf where, somebody can find it, 40 years from now when I die, like that sort of thing? So, I mean, when you journal, how is it just about the journaling for you, or is there a review process that you go back and, track your progress, so to speak? What do you do with your journaling?
Yeah, so I don't really have a format as to how I journal. I kind of just write down whatever I might be thinking or feeling in the moment. But I do go back and read things from, a year or two ago, because I do think it's important to see the progress that I've made. I'll look
Hmm.
back to something, 3 or 4 years ago and wonder what I was thinking at that time, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of, you know, intrusive thoughts that made their way into my journaling. And
Hmm.
I think it's very impactful for myself to see that I'm not there anymore, to
Yeah.
see how much I've grown since then. Um, and I mean, that's not to say that every day is a great day for me, because it's not.
Hmm.
I still have times where I struggle, and I question, and I wonder, what's going on in my life. But at least I know that I've grown from who I was even a year ago. I can go back and look at journal entries and,
Hmm.
see the angst that I was experiencing. Because even though it's been 8 years since I've left my ex-husband, it's really only in the last 4 years or so that I started on my healing journey.
Hmm.
So I just think it's very motivating to see the growth that you can make when you put the work into yourself.
Well, absolutely. And I think, personal growth is, so we both have kids and we probably, you do as I do, we measure them against the wall, on their birthday. And, it's, you don't realize how much growth has happened when you compare it to sort of a watermark from a year ago or 2 years ago. Like you don't notice that you're growing from one day to the next. But then when you look back at those journals, I'm sure, as you mentioned, it's like, okay, wow, I was there.
Yeah.
I was there, and now I'm here, and that must be very, very gratifying, I would imagine.
Definitely. I was actually, funny enough, just having this conversation with a friend the other day who's known me throughout my whole journey from my early 20s to now. And he asked me, "Did you see yourself where you are today, 5 or 10 years ago?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I
Hmm.
thought, I thought my life was over,
Yeah.
basically. And if somebody would have told me, you're going to be on this health journey, you're going to be going to the gym, you're going to be teaching yoga, you're going to be helping people on their own healing journeys, I would have laughed at them, because I never thought that it was possible.
Where, so where did you think you were going to be?
Honestly, I didn't even know if I was going to be here anymore
Mm.
at that point, 5, 10 years ago. I had no plans for my future, because I was stuck in this situation that I just never thought I was going to get out of again.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And here you are today.
And here I am today.
Indeed. So Erin, if someone is listening and is involved in, a relationship with a narcissist or an abusive relationship, or feels that they might have CPTSD or regular PTSD, and for those of you who are unfamiliar, PTSD and CPTSD, not all clinicians agree on the distinction between the two, but those who do believe that PTSD can be caused by a singular event, right? Like a car crash, right? But CPTSD is often sort of a combination of things that happen over years. So like, different forms of abuse, different incidents over abuse that if taken individually might not have a dramatic impact on a person, but the cumulative effect can be enormous. Um, so if someone is listening who feels they might have CPTSD, PTSD, anything like that, or are trying to, or are, suspicious that they might be in an abusive relationship or a relationship with a narcissist, what are some first steps that you could recommend for someone to get help or start their own healing journey or to remove themselves from this situation?
Yeah, of course. Well, in in a case like mine where you think you might be in a relationship with a narcissist, I think one of the telltale signs is when you start Googling what is narcissistic abuse. I think by that point you probably already know what's going on with you.
Like if
And
you Google, "Do I drink too much?" You
yeah,
probably drink too much.
exactly. I think hopefully you have someone close to you that you can talk to about it. I think bringing awareness to other people in your life rather than trying to hide what you're going through from them is really important, because the more you hide it, the more shame you feel, and nobody wants to go out in the world feeling shame about what they're experiencing.
Mhm.
So I think talking about it, I think, researching about what PTSD or PTSD is important. Figuring out your symptoms that you're having and finding a way to get out of the situation. I think that's the hardest part. Um, I think finding a family member or a friend that you can go to is important. And one of the biggest things for me was going no contact with that person. Don't
Mm.
allow them any sort of access to your life whatsoever, because once they have a way to weasel back in, they're going to do that.
The
Yeah,
clause will be in, yeah.
exactly. So that probably is my biggest piece of advice. You need to cut that person off completely. Like,
Mhm.
do not allow them any access. You know, I've cut off friends who were, mutual friends, because I knew they were speaking with my ex-husband about what was going on in my life. Um, Anybody who I thought might go to tell him what was going on with me, unfortunately didn't get to be a part of my life anymore.
Mhm.
And then I really think, and I know therapy is not accessible to everybody. Although, if you go to some place like the YWCA, they suggested a place to go for free therapy, which was completely amazing.
Mhm.
I did end up in the end, thankfully, with very supportive parents, going to a psychotherapist and paying for therapy, which, it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of time, but it is so worth it. If you have any
Mhm.
way to get into therapy, that to me is the way forward.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, depending on where people live, there may even be support groups, particularly in bigger city centers, there may be free support groups that you can join, I mean, I know I had a very bad experience with online chat forums around PTSD. And I found a few Facebook pages, and I thought, okay, this is gonna be good. But it was pretty bad because there were some people who I I hate saying better or worse, but let's just say they were in a different place than I was, and they were in very angry places, and it was coming out on these Facebook pages a lot. So, but I mean, group therapy or like support groups and therapy sessions, at least have someone who is facilitating them. So that might be an option in your city. So. I don't. I'm just trying to think of where people might go to check that out. I mean, obviously they could Google, they could
They
check
could
at
Google, and
health
I
clinics and
find
community centers.
that like mentioned, your YWCA, um, if you have any sort of yoga or wellness community around you, they often know of all sorts of different sorts of things to offer for wellness and health. So a lot of times they'll know of different places to go to be able to get some support.
Mhm.
Um, if you're in Toronto, there's a place like the Barbara Schieffer Clinic, and they deal with women who have been in domestic abusive situations. They offered me lots of good resources to be able to use for myself. I do think a lot of it is, your own research. Unfortunately, sometimes things aren't readily available.
No.
But even if you can find one thing to get you started, more often than not, they'll have other resources available to you that they can direct you to when you explain your situation and they know what's happening with you.
Somebody knows where you need to go to get what you need. So it's sometimes a matter of just knocking on doors and asking people questions until you find. But I mean, help is out there. Support is out there for sure. Something occurred to me. You mentioned, and we mentioned this a couple of times, that you felt shame. And I'm always curious about that. I wonder why we feel shame when these things were clearly happening to you, like somebody was doing these things to you. Where did the shame come from?
I feel it's because we feel like we let it happen to us. And
Mm,
let it happen to us over and over and over again in years, for years. So I think that's where the shame comes. You feel stupid for staying. You feel like, what was I thinking? And what are people going to think of me for staying in that situation for so long?
mm,
And instead of
mm,
just saying, well, you were manipulated and brainwashed and, in this cycle of abuse, you take it on yourself instead and think,
mm.
what was I thinking? Why did I do this? Why did I stay?
Well, like the people who just say, "Well, just leave him,"
Yeah.
just get out, right? I mean, it's that sort of mentality. It's hard when you've never been through something to understand, why,
I, don't judge unless you've gone through it, because you don't
Mhm.
you don't know and you can't understand.
No.
I even hear myself telling my story sometimes and realize how crazy it probably sounds to some
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And I've learned that those people don't understand. They just don't understand the situation and how you
Mhm.
could get involved in that. They don't understand how insidiously it starts with seemingly, innocuous things happening that you're like, oh, that's weird that I remembered that wrong.
Mhm.
Because it doesn't start with full on abuse and full on screaming in your face or,
Yeah.
chasing you around with a 2x4. Like, it doesn't start that way. It
Mhm.
starts with very tiny things that make you question your reality. And then it
Mhm.
just, snowballs from there.
Well, and a metaphor that I like to use in therapy quite a bit is something I learned in high school biology. And I don't know if it's true. We never experimented with it, but my biology teacher said, if you put a frog in a pot of water and you put the pot on the stove and you turn the heat up slowly enough, the frog will not try to save itself. It won't realize that it's getting to a boiling point, a point where it's going to start damaging tissues until it's too late. So, now you have the benefit of hindsight, right? You look back on that and you're like, well, of course I was in boiling water, but it's like the heat was getting turned up so slow, you
You
didn't
just don't realize
realize.
it.
No, and it was accumulating until a certain point where you're like, okay, this is some bad news and I got to get out of this.
Yeah, and I will say, my mom, I think, saw right through him very early on.
Mhm.
But,
As
you
parents
know,
tend to do.
yeah. I remember right before she walked me up the aisle to get married, she said, "You don't have to do this." And I went, "What are you talking about?"
Like, maybe that should have been a red flag too. Like, are
Always
you
listen to your
sure?
mother.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, Um, but definitely, I think if some people who in your life whose opinion you value are raising red flags, I mean, it's obviously, it's I'm a big fan of doing what you feel is right for your own life, but also taking counsel of sort of wise people in your life is never a bad thing. Erin, What kind of meditation do you do? Because there's always this big question mark around meditation. Oh, you just meditate, meditate, meditate. And it's kind of like, well, there's so many different modalities, so many different ways to meditate. What is something that worked for you in terms of meditation?
Yeah, of course. So I am, admittedly, I'm not the best meditator in the world. My thoughts race a lot. So I don't do silent meditations because that doesn't work for me. I do guided
Mhm.
meditations. I find sort of the length I want. I find a voice on it that I find very soothing. I don't make them too long because I lose my attention quite easily, but somewhere around 10 minutes or so works for me.
Mhm.
And I just find a quiet space. I put my earbuds in and I just close my eyes and allow the voice to soothe me in the meditation. So, guided meditations for me is definitely the way to go.
Okay.
Because otherwise my thoughts just take over and it's very unproductive for me.
So do you have an app that you use?
Yeah, I use the Calm app.
Calm. Okay, yeah. And I mean, there's Calm there, and
I know there's
we're
like
not endorsing
Insight
anything.
Timer, I think is another one. There's a bunch
Yeah,
of
I've
meditative
heard
apps out there.
I've heard of Headspace. People speak very highly of that. I have an app on my phone. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it started off years ago as a sleep app, right? And all it was just sort of like some ambient noises, or you had a forest and you had a stream and you had a thunderstorm. But now it has morphed into this big, huge thing where there are guided meditations and bedtime stories and binaural beats and all that sort of stuff. So it's become, I just can't remember the name of it offhand.
Yeah,
But there are
I
lots
do
of
think,
free apps out there.
yeah, and you have to try a bunch of different things to find out what works for you, of course,
Hmm.
because what works for me isn't going to work for you and vice versa. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. They get frustrated that the meditating isn't working for them. And I
Yeah.
believe they just haven't found the right type of meditation for them yet.
Yeah, well, and the other thing too, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings around meditation. People feel that you have to sit there and your mind has to be completely calm, and that's not the case because the only time your mind is calm is when you're dead, right? But I mean, like meditation is more it's allowing these thoughts to happen and just saying, okay, all right, thank you. I'm not going to dwell on that thought. Thank you, thought, for coming into my head. Goodbye, and then come back and focus on your breathing or focus on a sound or something like that. So
Exactly. And I
I,
do say that a lot in my yoga class, acknowledge, because I teach a very gentle yoga, holding the poses for a long time, and it's more of a meditative yoga, really. And
mhm,
I always just say, it's totally normal for thoughts to come into your head or for chatter to be going on. Always acknowledge it and realize it's there, but then just let it go for a few minutes.
mhm,
Doesn't even, you don't even have to meditate for 10 minutes. You can meditate for 5 minutes. Like anything, it's a practice just like anything else.
mhm.
You have to build up how much time you spend doing it. In the beginning, it might only be, 1 or 2 minutes,
Yeah.
but over time, it will get to be more and more for you.
Mhm. One thing that I have used myself that I find really helpful is a body scan. Because when I am having, when I am triggered or when I'm agitated, I carry a lot of my tension in my body, clenched jaw, or I have my shoulders raised or something like that. So doing a body scan,
Mhm.
starting at my feet, I lay down on my bed and I deliberately relax. Starting with my feet, I relax all the muscles in my feet to make sure there's no tension, move up to my legs, my abdomen, my shoulders. And then I spend a lot of time on my neck and face because that's where I carry a lot of tension.
Mhm.
And just deliberately relaxing all that can be very helpful, I find.
funny that you say that. That's how I begin every yoga class that I teach, is with a
Mm,
full body scan, beginning at the
nice.
tips of the toes, ending at the crown of the head, noticing areas of tension or stress, any areas where you might be holding trauma,
Mm,
and acknowledging that as you go along. It's my favorite way to begin a
yeah.
yoga class, just bringing awareness to what's going on inside the
Mm.
body.
Now, Erin, we're just about out of time, so I just had a couple of other questions. Um, so you do yoga and you teach yoga.
Mhm.
Is there, do those two different kind of ways of showing up for yoga have different impacts on your journey, on your mental health? Like, is teaching yoga, it must bring you something. It must be very rewarding, I would think, but also doing yoga as a participant must be very rewarding. Do those two different things bring different things to your healing journey?
Definitely. I think when I practice my own yoga, it's really of an internal reflection for myself. Um, it allows my body and mind to sort of connect with each other, allows me to work through, any stress that I might be going through at all. Um, I do try to practice yoga pretty much every day,
Mm,
whether it's in the studio or at home, just to release tension in the body. As we know, the body keeps the score and remembers things that the mind might not. And so releasing that tension from the body has been extremely helpful for myself. And teaching yoga brings me joy in another way. I love that I can guide people in their own healing journeys. I love feeling the energy that everybody brings into the room, and sort of the energy they release when they're in a yoga class, releasing tensions and releasing stresses or anything that might be going on. And I find I soak in the energy from everybody in that
mm,
class while I'm teaching, which really, it's an amazing experience. I love teaching
mm.
yoga.
Yeah, my wife is a yoga teacher. I would love to be more into it than I am. It's just one of those things that I fail to make time for. I always enjoy it when I do it, but I'm not good at it, so I don't do it very often. But then, of course, how are you ever going to get good at it, right? You
And
just get
I would
involved in this
say that
cycle.
means you need to do it more.
There we go. Well, exactly that. Exactly that. So Erin, so I want to end, I always like to end the show on a note of hope, and you mentioned something very poignant. You didn't say it in exactly these words, but you felt that your life was over, right? And you were dwelling in deep darkness and despair. So for someone who might be listening to the show who is in that place, what is a message of hope that you could leave them with?
Of course. I think really to sit with your feelings, acknowledge what's going on, but you need to reach out to a community that can offer to support you, can offer um, different ways of healing, ways that maybe you haven't thought of, because there's many things that I never thought of. I thought EFT tapping was a bit of a joke before I started doing it.
It does
Um,
sound it does sound a little flaky. Same with EMDR,
yeah,
It's just like, really? You're going to move your eyes back and forth and I'm going to be okay?
I know, I know. I think, finding out all different types of healing modalities, trying them out. Not everything is going to work for you, and things certainly aren't going to immediately pull you out of a depression. It is, it's a process, it takes time. But I think not giving up, trying all sorts of different healing methods to see which one is going to be right for yourself, and then just talking about it, finding somebody you can talk to. The more you talk about it, the more you can release it from your
Mm,
body, from your mind. And attempt to move on in your life, because, life isn't over, even though we think it might be when we're going through something like this. There can be a beautiful life waiting for you at the other end of it. You just have to make that journey to go through to get there, but it's worth every second of it.
Absolutely. And I mean, Erin, I'm so glad that you stuck around. I'm so glad you're here, and happy to have you tell your story. So, Erin, do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I think really the only thing I would add is find your community. Find your community and just start the healing process. Even one tiny step is the beginning, and it might not seem like a lot in the beginning, but every little thing that you do contributes to your healing, and we're all worthy of a healing journey. No matter what you've been through, we're all worthy to be here, and we're all worthy to find happiness in our lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Erin, on that note, I want to invite you to stick around for a couple minutes after I stop the recording, and then we can debrief a little bit. But Erin, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today, and I want to thank you for just your honesty and openness and transparency. I mean, you have an absolutely inspiring story, and I mean, I know that anybody listening to this is going to pull a lot of wisdom, either for their own lives, or they might have someone in their own life who is experiencing similar difficulties that they could send this show to and say, hey, listen to this, because this woman has some good things to say.
Well, and thank you for having me. I think what you're doing is so important, bringing attention to mental health issues, bringing them to the forefront, and destigmatizing all these things that we think about mental illness.
Yeah, and I mean, thank you, and I think that removing the stigma and just having conversations about it is so important. Like we wouldn't think twice about talking to someone about cancer or diabetes, but for some reason, as you said, there's the shame. Somehow this is my fault. Somehow this is, I can't seem to. I took a nice hot bath with essential oils. Why am I not better? Why haven't I snapped out of this? And it's just like, it's going to take more than that.
Exactly.
So. Yeah. So, Erin, thank you so much for being here, and I hope to have you on the show again sometime.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.